So, in the case of the Hetch Hetchy Valley, the anthropocentric considerations won out over the preservation of the environment, and the people of San Francisco got access to water. But even if you subscribe to the anthropocentric view, there's another question in play. Was it their water to take? After all, San Francisco was not the only city in the region that might have laid claim to that water, and the reality is that Native American communities had not only been relying on the valley's resources for thousands of years, but also stewarding the valley through controlled brush fires that brought about the growth of beneficial shrubs and grasses, which drew wildlife to the region. So, even if you buy into the anthropocentric view that human considerations get prioritized over the biocentric view, which humans get to benefit? And who gets to make those decisions about how natural resources are distributed? Enter environmental justice. Defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in environmental law, regulations, and policies. Environmental justice means that no one is excluded from consideration and having a voice in decision making, regardless of their race, ethnicity, income, or any other characteristic. Everyone deserves the same amount of environmental protection and access to resources. There are many ways that environmental justice struggles manifest, but one way that I have hinted at in the Hetch Hetchy Valley case is the invasion and forcing out of indigenous peoples by colonial societies. Indigenous peoples are historical occupants of a region, here in the US called Native Americans or Alaska Natives or Native Hawaiians, depending on where you are talking about. However, there are indigenous peoples all across the globe, including the Inuit in the Arctic, rainforest tribes in Brazil, the Aboriginal peoples in Australia, the Berbers of northern Africa, and countless others. The invasion of indigenous lands by colonial powers has resulted in exploitation of the lands and ecosystems that they previously depended on and stewarded. For so many indigenous peoples, their culture and way of life was and is tied up symbolically with the land. And so these colonial takeovers have transformed their way of life and threatened their culture. Another example outside of the Hetch Hetch Valley is the push to drill for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge on the northern coast of Alaska. This region is home to an indigenous group called the Gwich'in, whose way of life is entirely dependent on the herds of caribou that also occupy the region. Allowing the area to be opened up to oil drilling could destroy their livelihood. Here we see a member of the Gwich'in uh, steering committee speaking in protest to proposals to expand oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Environmental justice principles hold that the voices of stakeholders, like the Gwich'in, must be respected and considered in environmental decision making.